Retailers are facing an uncertain market that has left even the most confident a bit unsure as to what might be coming next. Supply chains are back to normal, but now it's the consumer that's changed. Somehow the behavior we expected to see is being replaced by a new attitude. This has left many brands and retailers scrambling to figure out whether this is a short-term aberration or a longer-term market shift. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. To answer this question, I reached out to Carol Spieckerman, a top retail influencer and thought leader and founder of Spieckerman Retail. If you are looking to grow your retail business, even in tough times, she's the person who can help you make that happen. Carol's a go-to solution provider for brands and retailers who want help communicating clear value, sharpening their positioning and targeting, and accelerating their B2B business development. In this episode, Carol will be discussing why diversification is a key growth engine for the future of retail, how retailers can successfully develop discretionary categories, and the huge opportunities in multi-channel retail and how brands can take advantage of this. Part of running a successful retail operation is having the right people on your leadership team. However, finding those people is not always easy, especially in markets where competition for top executives is fierce. That's why many leading businesses reach out to AsiaNet consultants. They have an extensive network built up over 3 decades of running executive search assignments for some of the world's biggest brands and retailers. You can learn more about them at their website, asianetconsultants.com. I'll also put a link in the show notes for this episode. Meanwhile, let's sit down with Carol and get our retail business on a profitable trajectory. Carol, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. I'm really excited to have you here on the show. I think everyone right now is really struggling with retail to understand where things are going, but I think equally as important, where might there be opportunities? And there really is nobody better to ask than yourself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Jane. That's quite flattering, considering how well-versed you are in all things retail.
Well, thank you. Now, you talk about diversification in its many forms, in terms of categories, in terms of solutions. What are you seeing around that?
Well, if I can back up just a little bit and sort of tee up the way that I talk about retail.
Okay.
And that's through what I call my retail trajectories.
All right.
Which are themes that I'm constantly creating, connecting, and mapping across all kinds of categories, borders, business models, and touch points. And it's just a way to create a new language around retail that is more universal and that ties all these seemingly disparate things together into common calls to action and into these sort of these universal themes. And all of it, though, is under one fundamental premise that I talk about platforms and the fact that retailers are no longer just places that sell stuff. They're now platforms that tie together digital, physical, content, data, new formats, and so much more. And it's just a lot of complexity and capability that didn't exist in retail years ago. But what it means is going forward, retail will be a lot more about platform building, platform partnerships, and platform monetization. So I'm teeing all of that up because it really is the runway to talk about things like diversification. And my trajectory for that is diversify or die. Because all of a sudden, the growth engine of retail's future has become diversification rather than store growth. Now, there are some exceptions, our dollar store friends that still think there are thousands, tens of thousands of more stores that they can continue to open around the world. But in general, this diversification push is in full swing. And one of the reasons is I think retailers are starting to see or continuing to see the perils of lack of diversification. One form of that is category killing and how perilous that's become for retailers like Bed Bath & Beyond and Party City, David's Bridal, so many more. More recently, the Christmas tree shops, very specific niche businesses have been sort of on the edge for a while because retailers, of course, like Amazon, Walmart, maybe to a little bit of a lesser degree, can attack these categories at will and even do so at a loss. So it's a very competitive environment, and that lack of diversification has gone from being, category killing was a great model until it wasn't, And now it's a really tricky business to be in. Going to the positive side of it, though, diversification is taking many forms, which is category diversification. Probably the biggest example of that is these online marketplaces, where all of a sudden, even a category killer can open a marketplace with third-party sellers and sell all kinds of categories that aren't core to their business or their original businesses. You have diversification into new formats. Very quickly, this has become the rule rather than the exception for retailers to be multi-format operators. But the one that's really the hot button now is diversification into solutions and services and all kinds of non-product businesses. And that's something that I'm tracking really heavily right now, and that so many retailers are leaning into, particularly as some of those product-based headwinds continue to hit hurricane force. Labor shortages, supply chain snags, which I know you're very well versed in, and all of these other challenges that are converging together. And so solutions and services become a really powerful hedge against that and those margin misses that are associated with it.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. And I haven't heard anybody else present it from exactly that point of view before. So thank you for bringing that to everybody's attention. Now, when you look at these platforms and marketplaces, you're absolutely right. It is a direction that a lot of the big players are going in. Certainly Amazon set the pace. Walmart has jumped on that pretty successfully. And many, many other retailers are also adding third-party sellers. At what point does that reach saturation? Do you know what I'm saying? Like Amazon had that first mover advantage. Walmart, okay, was this sort of, alternative to Amazon with a little bit of a specialty in other areas. But at what point does that end up, for lack of a better word, sort of diluting itself?
I've got a trajectory for that.
Okay.
I talk about marketplace mayhem, and I don't know that we've hit the point of mayhem yet, but there are some very big downsides to this. And I think that what you mentioned is such a great point, is that when you hit a saturation point, that's yet another reason why retailers are pushing into solutions and services. Because if everyone has the same brands and the same stuff and the same categories, regardless of what their core business is, how do you differentiate and how do you compete profitably? So I think we are hitting somewhat of a saturation point. And you do have retailers that are taking a little bit more of a thoughtful approach. And they're saying, hey, we're not just going to open our marketplaces to all comers. We're going to curate this and make sure that it's in brand. And I think Target has made some moves in that direction. But then you have others like Walmart that are saying, hey, come one, come all.
Right.
It's all good. And these marketplaces actually are a form of diversification into solutions and services, because along with that becomes the ability to offer fulfillment and so on. So it becomes basically a passive income stream, and one of the bigger examples of platform monetization that I just talked about.
Right.
So it all kind of ties together. But yeah, I think there's a real concern that if everybody has everything, where do you go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe what you're looking at is platforms built around a category as opposed to a retailer trying to do everything themselves. I mean, is that something you're looking at?
I'll have to say that's another trajectory. This is one of my favorite ones out there, which is I talk about buy, build, or bridge, and you're just teeing them up one after the other. That's good. It's great. Buy, build, or bridge is sort of the big question in retail right now. It's the question keeping retailers awake at night. It presents a lot of opportunity, but also challenges because there are a lot of decisions to make. And that is deciding when it makes more sense to make an outright acquisition, when to build solutions internally, or when it makes sense to lean into those platform partnerships and bridge to new capabilities. Well, the most successful retailers are doing all three at once, and they're making good decisions about which one to deploy at any given time. So back to your question, yes, there are plenty of things that retailers have built in the past, but they've never been more open to those outside partnerships because it's a much more agile model. That, they don't have to buy the farm, although in some cases they decide to down the road, and they can lean into these alliances, these platform partnerships with others that just have the expertise in where they're trying to go next. And that's what's driving really so much of the innovation these days are these platform partnerships. And it presents a tremendous opportunity for my clients that offer solutions and services in retail, because retailers are saying, come on, we got to build these big bridges and help us do it. And that's a very big departure from the past when retailers were a lot more insular and they were like, no, we can do it ourselves. And they had all these firewalls up and bordering on paranoid. Very, very different climate now in terms of partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the fact that you brought up the word partnership, because I hear that a lot more from people throughout the supply chain. As you were saying, it's less about owning everything and more about partnering, so that you're maybe taking less profit, but you're also taking less risk. And it appears to me that people, and I don't know if you're seeing it the same way, are looking to offset a little bit of that risk nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And partnerships are the most agile way to do that completely. And, also I think where it's going next is what I'm calling the Great Migration, which is where retailers have made their big bets on buy, build, or bridge. And now they're starting to migrate between those models. So they might launch a partnership with a very able technology company, let's say, and then say, hey, thanks for helping us learn the ropes. We're going to take it internally now. And, so these relationships don't necessarily last forever.
Right.
Sometimes they end up dropping off. Other times retailers use them as a runway for an acquisition. Hey, we've had a great partnership for a couple of years. We want to buy your company. We want to own all the data. And that's another form of bringing it in-house. And then they go to build, where they build it up from there. So there's going to be a lot of shifting between these models too.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's a strategic approach for a retailer, but it's also a heads up to a supplier who needs to understand that this may or may not be a long-term commitment, and they need to go into it knowing that.
Absolutely. Spot on. And I tell my clients that all the time. You need to create some strategic dependencies.
Right.
And some of the best companies are really good at doing that, making retailers feel as though they can't live without them and have absolutely no incentive to bring it in-house and try to build it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that you're right. Companies are looking at it in a much broader way than they used to, whereas before it was own everything, right? I suppose in the really old days, it was sourcing products and selling products within your store. And then it moved towards private label or trying to own as many things as you could. And now people are realizing that, the cost of that, the risk of that has almost become crippling in many cases. And as you're pointing out, platforms are really sort of stealing the show nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And private label and private branding was probably the biggest mega example of retailers making that shift and that confident shift to, hey, if you want something done right, do it yourself.
Right.
And, building up these really complex branding operations, which of course was a shock to many suppliers. And that's a whole other story.
Right. Do you think that part of this is possible because suppliers have become more sophisticated, especially those that are used to selling third party, perhaps on some of the platforms, are now, in other words, a retailer has more options, whereas before a supplier was pretty much an order taker and didn't know any of the other aspects?
That's a great point. Yes. And everybody has options, and retailers have never had more options. So that can be a boon to some of the folks that provide those options, but it also means you have to stay on your toes because they will exercise those options. And, it doesn't get talked about enough that when we talk about private branding, it's not private brands or national brands. Many of these companies, as you well know, also make private brands. They don't maybe shout it from the rooftops,
right,
but it keeps their factories running and keeps the engines revving. So a lot of suppliers have, of course, a blend in their portfolios as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a good point. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with people, even the platforms who are now enabling others to use their logistics services, right? I think Amazon started that. I believe Walmart might be doing that as well. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yep.
So that's a different move than what we would have seen before.
And that goes back to platform monetization.
Right. So around these platforms then, from your point of view, what do you see as the next thing that perhaps the leaders on the major platforms might be doing?
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Well, I could tell you one they're already doing that's creating a bunch of disruption and is still in its early stages. And that is diversification into retail media. Or as I like to say, retailers have gone mad for ads.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
This is one of their biggest growth engines. And here again, has very quickly become the rule rather than the exception. Just about every retailer out there either has some form of an in-house retail media operation, or they're outsourcing it or cobbling it together through some of those platform partnerships. And here's another place where that great migration is happening very rapidly. Retailers like Lowe's that were leaning into 2 or 3 cobbled together relationships to put together an ad platform, just now pulling it in-house and going into that build mode and saying, hey, we want to own this. And particularly when it comes to their determination to own data, and this ad business is all about monetizing first-party consumer data, and it's all about owning that data, of course, because that's what adds value to that part of the platform. So this whole ad going mad for ads thing has so many ripple effects in the wake of it as well, where you have now retailers competing very aggressively against traditional advertising agencies. And if you talk to some of those agencies, you know they're pretty freaked out about it. But going forward, retailers will be in fierce competition with one another for ad dollars. And as all of these digital capabilities start rushing back into brick and mortar, that's going to add more value to all of the activity that happens within stores, which will add more value to the ad platform, and so on. So it just kind of goes on and on and on. And it means that plenty of suppliers, though, have some decisions to make, and they need to think about their budgets, where they're going to give those ad dollars to. And are they going to divvy it up among their favorite retailers? Are they going to shut out their traditional ad agency relationships? Who's bringing what to the table? So it's a very disruptive happening. And again, very much in its early stages, and a multi-billion-dollar opportunity that retailers like Walmart have made no bones about it, that this is their future and what they're really investing in.
I think that's a really good point to bring up, because you're right. When you see the numbers around it, they are staggering. And the profitability, of course, is also rather impressive. It reminds
70 to 80% margins.
Wow. Incredible.
Who doesn't want that?
Yeah, exactly right. It reminds me, I don't know, maybe this is just a bad analogy, and if it is, call me out on it, but it reminds me of the old days when stores used to have catalogs, and different vendors would need to buy ads in the catalog in order to, they'd buy sometimes it wasn't really an ad, it was a placement in the catalog, because it wasn't an advertisement in and of itself. The store would put together, I suppose, a photo shoot or whatever it was, but you would have to pay for that space, whether it was going to be a full page displaying your products or a partial page. So I don't know if that's analogous, or maybe it's something different altogether.
No, I love that. And I remember those days. It really is sort of what's old is new again.
Right.
And it's just it is just a more modern version of that. I remember, in the days of the marts, when, the marketplace, the old marketplaces, the physical markets, where, retailers went from showroom to showroom collecting dollars for those placements. And so it's really, again, what's old is new again. It's just I think it is a more modern version of that, to your point. And I love having that historical reference, because that usually is the case, that something isn't completely new. It's just a concept that's been modified based on the new capabilities that are available. But it does really speak to retailers saying, we're going to own our platform assets. And that's why I talk about platforms, because you have to think of it that way in order to sort of understand their goals and the why behind what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you're pointing out, as it becomes more competitive at the product level, right, in terms of being able to get any kind of margin on that, particularly for e-commerce platforms where they're really getting hammered by all the costs, right? The logistics costs, everything else around it. then where are they going to be getting profit? And as you're pointing out, well, that would be in the advertising side of things.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. And it's again, just heating up.
Yeah, really interesting to watch what's going on there. Now, you also talk about the idea of discretionary categories. And I think that's interesting, particularly now as we see inflation taking a bite out of consumer budgets, and not for everybody, obviously, but it certainly is having a bigger impact, and discretionary spending seems to be under pressure. What are you seeing around that?
Well, the way I put it in terms of trajectories is I say that all of these retailers are suddenly trying to realize their discretionary dreams.
Right.
And, you've got retailers like H-E-B, the popular grocery retailer out of Texas, opening home shops.
Right.
And back to our earlier points that we were talking about, filled with private brands.
Right.
It's funny how grocery plays into these discretionary dreams, both on the pro side and on the challenge side. On the opportunity side of the fence, grocers have that frequent traffic that grocery drives. That's what grocery, as a category accomplishes for retailers. But if you're in the grocery business, you're always on a tightrope with margin. So that's, a strategy that some Kroger, H-E-B, and others are deploying, is to say, let's just cram some of these discretionary categories in there. They're not off-brand. I mean, putting home products in a grocery store makes sense. And when we dedicate space to this, it helps bump up the margins and offset that other side of the business. Well, of course, one of Walmart's killer strategies that so many others have tried to emulate was using grocery as a traffic driving lure in order to drive sales in discretionary categories. Nice to make a little money on it, but don't have to if people are buying grapefruits and then checking out the sweaters. But what's happened is, and Target, look at Target. They went from basically having a little bit of CPG goods over here and there to really investing in building out a full grocery program for that very reason, because they needed to continue to be a destination. They needed that more frequent traffic. But what's happened is, as retailers try to use grocery as a discretionary lure, they've arguably made grocery too convenient. Now you can order groceries online, pick it up at the curbside, have it delivered to your door. So that lure is getting diluted. And that's one of the reasons that I don't really hear anybody talking about, that it's dinging these discretionary categories. And I love the term that Walmart uses. It's not fun for them, but they talk about unfavorable mix shifts. And that's another way of saying we're selling too many darn groceries,
right,
and not enough of this other stuff. So these unfavorable mix shifts are happening because that lure is softening a little bit. Shoppers, for many reasons, aren't feeling as compelled to load up on discretionary categories, inflation, and so on. And all of that is combining to make it a challenge for retailers. So they've got some arrows in their quiver, but I think they're still trying to figure it out. One thing is their e-commerce environments in a lot of cases don't have those same virtual adjacencies that their stores do. So they need to be able to convert shoppers from the grocery space online into discretionary categories. They need to, get better at making those discretionary categories deliverable along with groceries and make that a logical pairing. They're remodeling their stores, which is great, to create better adjacencies, but also to increase dwell time. And that's a lot of the solutions and services piece too. When you have those solutions and services and pharmacy and things like that in a store, it increases dwell time and therefore increases the chances that somebody might go, again, buy a sweater or a mattress or whatever. So there are a lot of factors coming together there. But either way, retailers are determined to make their discretionary dreams come true. They have some arrows in their quiver, but a lot of challenges as well. And I'd love to get your take on that, because you're very involved, I know, with the sourcing piece of it. And, what are you seeing on that side?
Well, like you pointed out, it's a huge challenge. I think that a lot of retailers are faced with surviving in the short term, but at the same time trying to implement longer term strategies, which is really tough to do because sometimes they are counter to each other. I think especially now, as you're faced with you coming out of the pandemic, where you had one problem, which was logistics, and now you're thrown into another one, right, which is inflation and everything else surrounding that. It's complicated for people who are running retail to know what to do, how to do it. I think too many people look over their shoulders at what other people are doing and copy that without really thinking through what works for their customers. So you see a lot of people maybe moving too quickly into a new strategy because other guys are doing it and we have to do it too, as opposed to thinking through, well, let's take a step back a second and let's look at who our customer is and maybe even ask them what might serve them. So I think, I know that's a very broad answer, but I think that's a lot of where I see maybe some blind spots.
Yep. Well, and I think, to your point, that's, again, sort of a historic model, I think, which is, okay, they're doing it. Am I going to be a fast or a slow follower?
Right.
But going back to this diversification and those third-party partnerships and all of that it puts on the table, retailers have to realize that there are no templates anymore. You really have to make it your own and look among all those options and decide what's best for your business and as you said, for your customer, rather than assuming that there's some sort of a template that you can follow. So again, challenges and opportunities. You can make it your own, but you have to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I look at, and I'd love to get your take on it, is there's been a big move to curbside pickup. And I can see why, because obviously it's convenient for people to order online and just drive and get it rather than wait to have it delivered. But you do miss the opportunity to get the person to come into the store, as you were saying. And that was sort of part of that synergy, right, between online and offline, that maybe that's a missed opportunity. I don't know. I mean, I think you're probably better qualified to answer on that.
Well, I talk about the convenience conundrum and the fact that it's tough because retailers have to offer. I will say Walmart really stands out as the exemplar of this.
Okay.
They were doing everything at scale, of course, but Walmart was the first retailer, I think, to kind of zig while everyone else was zagging on that. They realized we have to meet our customers where they are. We cannot be in the business of curtailing choice, because right now choice and convenience are basically synonymous with shoppers.
Right.
So there were retailers that, to their peril, started trying to curtail choice and saying, oh, this is more profitable for us. This is easier for us to execute. And shoppers were like, I don't appreciate you forcing me into this option that is not what I want to do. Part of the convenience conundrum, too, is acknowledging that even the same shopper can have different preferences depending on any number of variables. So the old thinking was, oh, there's an online shopper or shoppers that don't like to go in stores. Well, now they know that's a moving target. And, some shoppers prefer going into a store for any number of reasons. So they've realized they can't, sometimes the hard way, they can't be in the business of curtailing choice. And that means if it's not particularly profitable or it doesn't bring people in the store, they just kind of have to suck it up and find new ways to get customers in stores and to sort of make the math work out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of rethinking that needs to be done around all these changes that are happening. And it's not easy because these guys are trying to run an operation that's a pretty fast-paced operation in most of retail, and yet at the same time try to anticipate the future, gear up for the future, with a lot of curveballs being thrown at them in between, especially, in the recent years, right? It's tough.
It's really, really daunting. And I really don't want to be a Pollyanna about it and say, oh, but there's so many opportunities. There really are, though.
Yeah.
I say that, before it was about just figuring out what was even possible. Can we do this? And now that so many things are possible, it's gone to setting clear priorities. So it's almost like, be careful what you wish for. Everything's on the table. Now, what do you want to do?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes, right, you end up having too much choice. And that's an even worse situation. Now, you also talk about the fact that retail now has become so, I don't know what, multi-channel, omni-channel, what you call every place, everywhere. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just amazing where you see retail opportunities cropping up in places that were completely unexpected. What's the big picture that you're seeing around that?
Well, from a brand perspective, and in particular, I've been saying that the brand world has become an everything, everywhere, all at once situation, to borrow from the very bizarre hit movie.
Yes.
But, there's a lot of reasons for that. And, again, going back in the Wayback Machine
Right.
for branding, that, you remember when everything was about exclusives. Brands couldn't even think about opening their own stores, or they would be putting their wholesale relationships in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And you couldn't sell to more than one retailer in a channel.
Right.
And there was all kinds of hand-wringing at Brand HQ about distribution choices, about all of that. And now all of a sudden, the floodgates are open. And the thinking has changed radically to where brands being everywhere, everything, everywhere, all at once is a good thing. Not only just tolerable, but maybe even preferable. Because these days, with consumer attention being so fragmented and so many shiny objects out there, it really is the only way to keep brands top of mind. You can't have them tucked away in a corner somewhere, or they might as well not exist. Or as I say, now ubiquity is the new exclusivity.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Well, and it goes back to what we talked about, though, Jane, because, of course, there are perils to that model as well. If everybody has everything, then you can reach a point of saturation and nobody stands for anything. But, retailers aren't the only ones playing the diversification game. Brands now have so many options too. They have wholesale, direct-to-consumer, e-commerce, participating in marketplaces. And most of them are exercising a combination of those options. Going forward, though, I think rather than these decisions being sort of accidental, stumbling into these relationships, I'm seeing brands being a lot more strategic about it and I'm encouraging a lot of brand companies to make phased plans.
Right.
If you're starting out direct to consumer, wholesale is absolutely not off the table, but you don't necessarily want to do everything all at once.
Right. Yeah.
You create phased plans for your brands. It makes sense, for your brands. So the thinking has changed. The tolerance for ubiquity is at an all-time high. But once again, all the options, you have to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I see now this race to direct to consumer. There's been a couple of high-profile brands that have decided they're pulling out of wholesale. They're going direct to consumer. And now everybody thinks that's the way to go, which might not be as successful for everybody, but that does seem to be a trend. I don't know what you're seeing around that.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a backing off of that. I'm seeing that decelerate a little bit.
Okay.
And in fact, I've been talking about the wholesale heyday, where a lot of these brands are revisiting the benefits of wholesale, where going back to that platform leverage or platform partnership, looking at some of these retailers and saying, you have an existing platform, you have all this data, the digital world has made these platforms more valuable. So brands are saying, maybe that's not so bad to not have to build it yourself. And it's, I think, particularly logical to start with direct to consumer and then move into wholesale. And here again, the thinking has changed dramatically to where it's gone from thinking of those as being mutually exclusive and now into thinking that they're synergistic. So even, look at a brand like Reese Witherspoon's Draper James.
Right.
Very strong D2C, very niche. And they're thrilled about their partnership with Kohl's.
Right.
They see it as a next stage strategy. They were strategic about it, didn't stumble into it. And they're like, okay, that's our next move. So I think we're going to see more of that, which I don't think necessarily diminishes direct to consumer, but it's taking more of a staged strategic approach to where wholesale is absolutely not off the table.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And it's interesting to see, like you said, that things are becoming more ubiquitous because there's more channels. I mean, I'm amazed when I see what's happening in the US with gas stations. Like my nephew lives in Dallas, and he always talks about a place called Buc-ee's. that sells all these things. And he said it's basically a gas station with so many other things there that one of these days when I finally get there to visit him, it's one of the places we're going to go, a gas station, mind you. But
yeah, let's go to when we're in Dallas, Fort Worth, let's go to the gas station. I'm actually from that area.
Oh, you really? Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I am. Maybe you hear it in my accent. I'm not sure, but yeah, that whole area, of course, is always blows my mind. Not only how fast growing it is, but how much retail it can support. I mean, just retail everywhere. And yeah, convenience retail, gas stations, all of those are they're getting ready to do a lot of really innovative things. And both from a product standpoint, going back to that diversification, going into solutions and services, tying in some of those digital capabilities. So if I were you, I would hit Buc-ee's.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do wonder if we're going to see, we had seen apparel, right, and cosmetics move into supermarkets. That's nothing new. And I'm wondering if the next move for them is going to be into convenience stores, because certainly the footprint of these stores is huge. And as you're saying, a lot of these stores are looking to diversify into other categories. I don't know if we're going to see that in those stores as well.
I wouldn't take it off the table at all. And I'm sure it's happening somewhere. When you see dollar stores now, again, simultaneously, I find it fascinating that Dollar General is simultaneously making this hard push for grocery. It's all about coolers and coolers and more coolers and putting more coolers in those stores. And then on the other side, they're also pushing into beauty and have a big initiative there. So these synergistic, getting those mix shifts correct, going back to that, is really the goal. And tying in those discretionary opportunities when it's just not too much of a stretch, and maybe even when it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting to see what's happening now across all these different channels. And I want to thank you so much, Carol, for taking your time to join us here. I have learned a tremendous amount from you. And I think so many people listening to this show would love to be able to reach out to you with their own questions.
Well, great. I'll give my contact information. Thank you so much, Jane. It's a pleasure speaking with you and taking some trips again in the Wayback Machine. I just love being able to talk about the history of retail and how it ties into the present and what that continuum is. It's just always fascinating. You can reach me at carol@spieckermanretail.com. And you can also go to spieckermanretail.com to see my speaking engagements, my podcast. It's all there.
Perfect. I'm going to put all of that in the show notes. And I would encourage everyone who is listening to this to reach out to Carol. She's got so much insights and information, and I'm sure that it would definitely be worthwhile to be able to have a chat with her. So, Carol, thank you again for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jane. Look forward to doing it again.